Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Frances Fogel Story Strategist podcast. I am your host, Frances Fogel. Today, I have Allan Dykstra, who is somebody that wears a number of hats, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. But the headline about Josh is that Josh sits within camp employee engagement. And for those of you who've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that Frances Fogel, Story Strategist, tries to support purposeful businesses across 4 different areas. One is marketing and sales. The other is employee engagement. The other is customer loyalty. And the 4th is community care. And invariably, my guests on this podcast have something to say about all of those things because they all do interweave, which is the main premise of my business. You cannot do any of them in silo. It makes no sense. And Josh is a man after my own heart insofar as identifying the story that underpins those 4 different practices for purposeful businesses. And you can see Josh on a TED talk that Josh did, I think about 8 years ago, maybe 6. I think about 6 years ago. He is from Denver, Colorado, and he's got a fabulous Zoom screen for those of you who are watching this conversation on YouTube. You can also find him as the CEO at Love Work. And I'm going to ask you, Josh, to introduce yourself. I'm going to just quickly say before that Josh and I met in a kind of community called, well, it's a Slack community called People Geeks. I was interested in whether or not anyone would like to come on the podcast and talk about a business that they felt very much spoke to what it was that I was trying to do as Frances Fogel, Story Strategist, and Josh got in touch. And then I realized that he was a brilliant person to have on the podcast. He has quite a following. He himself is on a podcast journey, which he can talk about, and has a wonderful business, which he will also tell you about now. So welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for being here. What out of what I just said do you want to talk about first?
Well, thanks for having me, Francis. This is really, really fun. What a nice intro. Um, yeah, I think maybe where we start or where we could start is to just reflect for a moment or talk about the reality that work just plays in our lives. Right? So, this is a huge focus of mine, to your point around kind of engagement and helping people feel like they can enjoy this thing that they spend their lives doing, right? And the sad reality is most people around the world don't, right? Somewhere between 70 and 80% of people actually fundamentally are kind of like about this thing called work, or worse, right? That's about the best we can do. And I just think this is the one of the great tragedies of our time, is that we've designed a reality uh, where work lies at the center of how we organize our days. And yet most of us just are not engaged. Most of us don't find our work purposeful. Most of us, so hopefully the people listening to this are in a different boat. But I think it's wise for us to remember that most people around the world are in a pretty tough situation when it comes to this thing called work.
Yeah, I mean, the people that I'm hoping are listening to this podcast are people who want to make work more enjoyable for people so that they can
Mm,
let go a little bit, so that they can move the dial insofar as what their bigger picture system change is. And I'm thinking about what you said in your TED talk, actually, about you kind of do need that bigger picture manifesto, that bigger picture system
mm,
change to bring everyone together. And I'm sure you have read probably a number of times Seth Godin's Song of
mm,
Significance, which I'm holding up to the camera for those of you listening to the podcast. And what's so amazing about Seth is that he's written all of the things about marketing and communications
mm.
and tribes.
Yeah.
And his latest book is about feeling significant in part of a bigger picture change, which is hugely alive for me now. And I'm being very discerning because I can only work with a couple of founders and leaders at any one time. I'm having to be very discerning about which bigger picture I'm trying to support in who I work with. And I think that's, yeah, what you talk about a lot, isn't it, in relation to making people feel seen, heard, understood, and part of something bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I might offer too, kind of just right at the beginning, is a connection between what brings us energy and a sense of meaning and purpose. I think this is a very practical thing that we can take away or think more about. Most of us is try to really identify what brings you energy and what makes you feel. What kind of work makes you feel good, right? I think the way we've worked in the past is focused a lot on what you can do, competencies, skills, and those things are important, sure, but you can end up being very good at something that sucks the life out of you. And that is not a good thing to build a career around, because that doesn't lead to meaning or purpose. So that might be the other thing I would offer.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of first of all, before we go into that, could you kindly give our listeners a sort of overview of your business and perhaps the podcast, the Work Revolution podcast as well, just so that people know what you're
Sure.
working on at the moment?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be happy to. Well, overall, Francis, I would say that I've only ever really done one thing in my career over the last 15 plus years, and that one thing is to help work not suck for as many people as humanly possible. And so I did that in the traditional, what I'd call the traditional ways, for a long time. So, organizations, generally speaking, have a sense that they could be better places for human beings, and so they spend a inordinate amount of money on trying to kind of fix their culture, fix their engagement, fix that. It's like $400 billion a year, almost, actually, globally. So it's just a huge, a staggering amount of money trying to fix this problem. And so they hire consultants and they hire workshop facilitators and they bring in assessments and they do all these things, and that many people listening have probably done. And I was the guy that you'd call to kind of facilitate those things for a long time. Um, and it was a lot of fun, and I flew to a lot of places and made good money doing it. And then I started to become haunted by what I saw as a problem, which was that a lot of this stuff that we talked about was not getting put into practice. Um, that you'd have a great retreat, you'd have a great conference, you'd have a great event, you'd take a great assessment, you'd read a great book, you'd watch a great video, but then you'd go back to your desk and you know what? You've got 1,000 emails to reply to, and you've got back-to-back meetings, and there's no possible way to integrate or apply those things, those maybe great things that you just learned. And so there's a huge, huge problem, I think, in the mechanism of this space of like trying to make work better for humans. And so we ended up building some technology. So we built this thing called Love Work to try to fix this problem. So what Love Work does is turn information into habit formation. Um, so it turns information into application and practices. And so we built that. And then most recently, so now that we've kind of, that took a solid 4 or 5 years of my life to kind of figure out how to do that and how to build the technology and how to actually make it efficacious and make it so and make it fun to use. And so that's been the last 4 or 5 years of my life. And now I'm getting back out there and getting back on the stages and talking more, trying to just speak more about what I do call the work revolution. So we are spinning up our own podcast here pretty soon, called the Work Revolution. I did one season of Work Revolution back in 2020, like the pandemic summer of 2020. I did a series of kind of rants about what I thought was happening in the world, so people can catch up on season one if they want to. But yeah, we're about to launch season two of that, and for me, that's really the most, in many ways, it's the most important kind of focal point of what I do. Because I think when I talk about a revolution, I mean a turnaround, right? The literal meaning of revolution, like the earth does a complete turnaround the sun once a year, right? So it's like work needs a revolution because it lies at the center of our lives. And like we were saying, most people don't get a lot of joy or purpose or meaning from it. So that's a quick intro on some of the things I'm doing.
I'd like to know what do you think you are most motivated by? Is it using work
Mm.
as a tool for change in the world, or is it much more around individual satisfaction? So that, and of course the two are very much interwoven, but what's your motivation for making work suck less, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it's kind of a system level question. Um, Most people I've realized over the years um, don't actually see these things that we call systems, right? So we choose a school system or we choose a workplace system, and then actually we get to make a lot fewer decisions than we think we're making because the system chooses for us. Right? If you're in the U.S., right, where you work determines if you get health care or not, right? Like this is so you choose that system. I choose like to live here. I choose to work in this place, and all of a sudden I'm not actually making very many choices anymore because the system is. And so for me, this is the level at which we have to start making some changes, is at the kind of operating system level. And for me, it's a question of the future, of kind of the health of our species overall, the health of our planet overall. Um, there's no possible way to create a great future for humans without fixing the way that we work now. Because work is largely deterministic of everything in our lives, like most people's lives, like most everything is determined by your work. Where you live is maybe less than it was, 5 years ago, but like it still largely determines like where you live for many people's jobs, how much discretionary income you have, like the people you see the most, uh, like how good of healthcare you have or don't, right? Like all of these things are determined by this thing called work. And we're heading in a direction with business as it is that heads towards really big kind of like extinction level problems, right? So as we talk about climate change, as we talk about um, engagement, right? So whether we're talking about the individual, right, and our individual meaning or fulfillment, right, that's deeply impacted by this. But then all the way up to like big, hairy kind of like species extinction problems that we're seeing around the planet. All of these things orbit around this thing called work. And so for me, it does get very existential. When you ask me that question, right, it gets very, very big, very fast as to why we must kind of foster this revolution.
I mean, you and I are, yeah, I think singing from a very similar hymn sheet, and therefore I guess it's even more important that we remind ourselves that we are not the way that everyone else thinks. And the privilege that we have in this
Yeah.
conversation, I think, is that whilst we are privileged white middle class people, you are on one side of the pond and I am on the other. We've just had our spring budget announced, and those of us who are very um, alert to climate change mitigation strategies were slightly confused as to why there was a bit of a lack of mention in the spring budget, or rather
Mm,
less of a mention than we might have liked. And
yeah.
and in turn, we hear that you lot are possibly going to have Mr. Donald Trump running for president yet again. And he has his interesting, creative thoughts about whether or not climate change is even a thing. So I guess part of this conversation that's interesting to me is, I'm uh yeah, going down rabbit holes over here, thinking about the
Mm,
ways in which we might support businesses that
yeah.
are willing to be part of the system. I'd love to know if you can share with my listeners who are predominantly, I think, probably UK based, how it
Hmm.
feels to you to be probably a small fish in not only a big pond but a ginormous pond over there, and where half the country may not be interested in what it is that you're talking about. How does that feel?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting place to be. And I mean, our whole election, upcoming election is an interesting topic in itself. I think overall it's been helpful for me to kind of zoom out a little bit further than just looking at this election cycle. Um, I think yeah, and the folks that are kind of looking at this with, I think, a clear mind are kind of horrified at the at the prospects that are happening over here. Um, but I do ask myself, like, what's happening here in the larger, like in the larger kind of capital S story of the, like, what is happening? Right? Because it's very bizarre. It's a very bizarre and strange time to be alive and to be kind of looking at these things. And so the more I research, the more I read and kind of try to educate myself on what's happening, as I become really convinced that we're kind of in a larger cycle of deterioration, which I've been talking about really. I mean, even since I published Invisible Tribe 12 years ago, right? This kind of decay of our systems, right? We're in this phase where it's seasonal, and this is kind of how biological systems work, right? There's a season of decay and deterioration, and we call it fall and then winter. But the great thing about fall and winter is that spring comes next. And right now it's kind of a wintry period of humanity. And so I think we're going to see a lot more deterioration of things in the next decade. Um, like it's still winter for a little bit longer, but spring comes after. And so what I'm trying to think about is how do we, like, what are we going to birth? Like what gets born when the spring comes, and trying to prepare and think about that, and it's one of the reasons why I felt it was really important that we restart the work revolution conversation now, is because we need to start planting seeds for a better vision, for a better future. I think we're going to have plenty of dystopian pictures of the future um, come out in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think we need to start thinking about better pictures.
And I'm so delighted that you got to that point, because I was rather hoping that I was going to corner you into saying something like this based on the wonderful things that you've written. Yes, great. It's quite early on in the conversation, and you've gone exactly where I was hoping we might go with this, because I did
Mm,
rather hope that you and I would end up having a slightly more existential conversation about these things,
mm,
because, like you, I'm extremely hopeful. This is a really good example of how I think that marketing communications, good ethical communications, can do wonders for getting people over the line of eco anxiety, of thinking that they are victims rather than creators, and sort of really helping people feel that they are not only responsible, but very excited to be part of a change. And
yeah.
being a woman as well, I'm thinking about a book called Wild Power, which you may or may not have read, which is all about the
Mm,
seasons of the menstrual cycle, and how for women that, spring, summer, autumn, winter seasonal undulation is just something that we've all lived with for as long as we've been menstruating. And so it just really resonates that,
yeah.
we to appreciate that we're part of a sort of cyclical system, I think is not sort of blindly optimistic and stupid, but just really
Yeah.
a reality check of kind of where we're at. So I'm very much with you on this.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also making me think about the kind of generous act of being optimistic, and
Mm,
talking about what powers we have right now and what we can do to move things forward in a positive way.
yeah. Yeah. I don't think I'm a optimist kind of by nature. I would very much call myself an optimist by choice, right? Optimism is a practice for me, mostly because I think, not doing that, it doesn't serve me very well. And I don't know if it serves kind of the larger kind of system of things either. So I do make that choice, I guess, to have an optimistic view of where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got these
Yeah.
kids, right? And I want to make a better thing for them. So that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something about
Mm,
even if you are the most selfish person in the world, it pays off to insulate your home and move away from fossil fuels. And, for those of us who are able to kind of zoom out and see the bigger picture, that's really
mm,
helpful at this time. But even for those people who cannot see past the end of their own nose, a lot of the changes on the horizon are going to be worth making anyway. And I think we're in the business of saying, right, okay, look, even if you don't care about anything else but yourself, do
Yeah.
this, like, and bringing this back to your work around work,
Yeah.
and my question about, are you turned on by the bigger picture system change, or is it very much to do with getting an individual from A to B? How do you, maybe let's talk about the crux of how you actually do support an individual move from this place of like dissociation and disillusionment
Yeah.
into something where they feel a lot more purposeful, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's in really in everyone's best interest, as far as I can tell, to create organizational systems that actually, you know, uh, bring out the best in people. Right? There's no real downside to this, other than maybe like the short term, like the big conflict here is between short term thinking and a good life. Like, right. So by all measurements, if we look at what it takes to create meaningful, purposeful, energizing work, there's no downside as long as you don't look at it with too short term of a lens, right? Because these things are like investments. These are seeds that get planted, and you just can't microwave some of these things, right? You just can't make them go faster than some of their biological structures allow. And so like these things take a little time to grow. Um, but yeah, there really is no downside to this, right? Because whenever you align what someone's work is with what intrinsically motivates and energizes them and puts them in a state of flow, like things are better, right? They enjoy their work more, they perform better, they're faster, they're more creative. There's no, right? So yeah, I would go back to this idea of energy. If we're talking about individuals trying to optimize their own workflow and work situation, we have a really good energy detector, and it's called our body. And our right, you can feel when you're drained by something, and you could feel when you're energized by something. The problem isn't that we can't feel these things; it's that we've been kind of trained not to. We've been trained to kind of ignore them. By the current working system, it really is just kind of like a put your head down, focus on power through. And I think we're a little better at this than we were 5 years ago before the pandemic. But I think enough of us have had a little bit of a maybe a big glimpse into what it what it means to contend with serious work burnout, and to like really take a look at that. And then the goal, I think, is to kind of get to the inverse of burnout, right? So the goal is to get to a place of really full energy tanks. Um, and I would say most people that I know of aren't really optimizing for this as well as they could. So yeah, if we're going to look in one place, to encourage people to figure out how to live a more fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful, career, look there. Like look at how many things are you doing throughout your day that are energizing. Do more of those, and then really take a look at what's draining you, and don't just kind of say dismiss it as, oh my goodness, that's part of work, right? Work is supposed to feel like work is supposed to hurt me, right? We've got all these kind of like internal misogynistic kind of patriarchal stories about like all the harm work is supposed to do to me. Who says? Right? That's just a whole bunch of crap. Like it's just not true. So stop doing the stuff that's draining you. Do more of the things that energize you, and I think you'll find your way much closer to a way of working that's purposeful and meaningful.
I think also when an organization employs your app, it in its own right is communicating that they do not expect the employee to do all the work themselves.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm too far away from my mic, relaxing into my conversation and your dulcet tones with your fabulous audio setup. Um, yeah, so the app says to
Yeah.
a member of staff, an employee, we care and we
Yeah.
do not expect you to do all this work on your own, because
Yeah.
it's easy enough to fall into the situation, as we all have, of blaming everyone else except ourselves for what's
Mhm.
going wrong in the world. And of course, it's a combination of government, corporate, and individual who have to step up now a little bit, uh, albeit not as BP so brilliantly did with a PR campaign. Sort of, I think the term carbon footprint was actually,
Mm.
if not coined by BP, certainly exploited in a way that made the individual feel that they were essentially completely responsible,
Right.
which is, of course, not the case. Sorry, BP, I know you haven't done everything terrible. I'm really into, the nuance of things. And I think if we focus too much on the big bad monsters, then a lot of the still a little bit bad, not so big monsters slip through the net. And it's important to me not to let that happen. So, but BP, I think it was your fault on that occasion. Yeah. So tell us about how, yeah, what happens? What's the journey of employment of the app?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you do? A big fanfare? Is there a party? What happens when an organization goes, we're going to use the app?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think exactly to your point, right? Nobody hires a company called Love Work or uses a product called Love Work without realizing they're kind of doing some signaling to the people that, hey, we do care about our system. We do care about the operating system of work that we're using. And I think that's delightful, right? I think that's really important that we recognize that kind of solving these problems it's an individual and a collective problem. This isn't an either or problem. It's a both and solution. And so it has to be a me and a we kind of solution. And so I do think, and this is where I think a lot of products in this space have gotten this wrong, frankly, is that they focused entirely on the me, right? Like that it's up to you to reduce your burnout. It's up to you, right? You just do more yoga, you do more meditation, right? And none of that's bad. But it's not the full solution, right? You cannot solve this without some system level changes as well. So yeah, we do have a little bit of a party when somebody joins Love Work, right? We call it a kickoff, but it's Love Work is a team focused experience, and this is another thing that's really different about it. But what we found, this is again trying to kind of balance both of these things between the me and the we. We found that the individual focus, that's where we started actually with Love Work, and it just didn't work. Like it wasn't sticky. It wasn't like I couldn't keep going. And it felt like I was trying to go to the gym and do a workout all by myself at 6 a.m. every day. That's a really hard habit to keep going.
By the way,
I might
everyone,
be
it is actually kind of 6 a.m. for Josh right now. I should just probably mention. So thanks to Josh for getting up to have this conversation at 6. He's a
my
disciplined
pleasure.
man. Yeah, go
There's
on.
no better way to start the day than talking about these things. This is great.
I
But yeah,
trust
right,
you.
like a habit like that is really hard to continue by yourself. Like most of us can't change ourselves by ourselves. We are social creatures. We need other people. We need some positive social pressure to keep going. If I go to the gym with a buddy, I actually keep doing it. And so very early on in the love work journey, we realized you got to do this as a team. You've got to do this with a group of people. Otherwise, you're just not going to stick with it. So that's why it's lovework.team, right? If you go find us online, that's where you'll find it. So it's a team experience. We have a kickoff event at the beginning for the team. And it really is a little bit of a party to say, hey, let's start thinking about work differently. And it's going to be, and also just kind of set some expectations around the experience because it's going to be different than anything you've tried before. This isn't an offsite. It's not a ropes course. It's not a weekend training session. This is not an LMS. It's not LinkedIn Learning. It's not right. It's not quite anything that you've done before because it's focused on practices. Right. Everything in love work is just obsessed with, okay, what am I actually doing behaviorally differently today? Like,
Mhm.
what am I thinking about? Like, how do I think about myself a little bit differently? Go back to that energizer question, right? How do I notice the things that energize me throughout my day? And this is a remembering problem as much as anything else. It's just like I get caught up in the busyness of work. And it's like, I don't mean to forget that great idea I heard, but I do because I'm caught up in the busyness of my day. And so we use the app and we use technology to kind of nudge you, right? Nudge you and poke you and remind you a little bit. If nothing else, just to remember to like say, oh yeah, I did want to focus on what energizes me today.
Mm.
And maybe that's all the work you need to do for today is just to notice and say, oh, when I do that thing, I feel really good. And that's a win, right? That's a big win.
Mm.
And so we're trying to get people to celebrate and understand that little things are very rarely little. Little things are the building blocks of the big things. And so you just need to put a bunch of them together and string a bunch of little behaviors together. And then all of a sudden you're a year from now, you're exponentially better than you were.
I am I'm sort of laughing over here because Josh and I have compared notes since we met, as it were, in November last year, 2023, about our children, because Josh and
Mm,
I have children of a similar age. Josh's are slightly older than mine. And it's that thing of when your child comes up to you and says, I made a, I think as the case was this morning with my 6-year-old, I made a cot that has Spider-Man in it out of Lego, but there's this special bit, right? And you're like trying to get all the morning jobs done and whatever, but you have to stop and say, that is great. Well done. I can totally see what you were trying to do there. And I think you were trying to do it yesterday and it was really hard and you've managed to do that today. Could you get dressed, please, and have your breakfast? But well done
yeah.
anyway, right? And it's just making me smile because so much of what, we're in the business of, Josh, I think is appreciating the inner child, not only in the people
Mm,
that we're working with, but also in ourselves and sort of what it is
yeah.
that is moving us to do the work. Um, and just to your point about workshop, and I just want to say all of the love to all of our HR friends who over all of the years have been trying their very, very best, quite often in a really crap situation, to
Mm,
make people feel better. And it's only recently that I've noticed, having sort of been, I'd say, on the peripheral, because I've never been a sort of L&D HR person front and center, but because of the work that I've done over the last 20 years, I've sort of very gladly partnered with L&D and HR people in order to get things done from an internal comms point of view. But I think we've moved quite far, haven't we, Josh, from here's a lovely yoga workshop at lunchtime and here are your childcare vouchers and let's go for a jolly and here's a ski trip and we're going to take you over the weekend and do Myers-Briggs, into a place where, as you say, it's a lot more integrated and a daily practice. And the mirror of that in my work is rather than just go in and run a workshop and then bugger off, in addition to being really discerning about the very tiny amount of people I want to work with, I also want to work with them for a year and
mm,
kind of spend a day a week with them
mhm.
in order to be a kind of fairy godmother, hand holding person who's a step away from the execution of things. And I think that
Yeah.
longevity of the relationship is also really important, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I do think we're going to see a large kind of change in this direction. This is the other thing I think we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years is really like the field of learning and development and training will reorient itself around practices in the next decade because it has no choice to not, right? Like we cannot possibly assimilate or integrate the amount of information that comes at us on a daily basis. It's physically impossible. And that information is only going to get more accessible as personal AIs come online, right? So information is going to become much less of a challenge, right? It already, um, I mean, it's more of a challenge and less, right? Because there's more of it, and we have more of it at our fingertips. But it's going to become less of a challenge as AI helps us kind of
Mm-hmm.
manage it.
And I'm
Um,
laughing a little as well because there's a phrase on your website. I'm not going to try and do an American accent, although I can do quite a good American accent. It depends on which area we're talking about. Shall I try? Do you want me to do it?
I would love it. I think that
Okay.
sounds great.
Pick
Yeah.
which one. It's going to be okay, I'm not going to insult anyone by even trying to name where this accent's from. But on your website, Josh, you say this toothpaste ain't going back in the tube, right? And
Yes.
this is my reading of your appreciation of AI and the fact that
Yeah.
to our point about the kind of optimism thing, it's like let's embrace this. It's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of work off a lot of people's desks that's just been a pain in the arse up
Yeah.
until now, and everyone can actually focus on some really important meaty stuff that's going to make them feel a lot more excited to be there. That's my
Yeah.
personal view right now, but maybe I'm
Yeah.
just, yeah, obliviously hopeful.
I hope we get there. Right. I think a lot of that, yeah, it's a wild time, right? To be in that space. But yeah, I do I do think, sorry, one second.
He's got a bit of a cough. Yeah, I was just thinking, like, we just got off the back of COVID, and then we're like, oh, something just bit us on the bum. It's AI. Where did that come from? And of course, it's been going on in the background, but for those of us laymen, it was, it's been quite a sort of sudden, in the last year, 6 months, something like that. Suddenly it's like, what? AI? What?
Yeah.
Everyone's just like, what?
Yeah.
This is the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that the important point here is that this isn't going backwards. And so we have to contend with how to make tech better, and more human and more humane. And um, yeah, like what are we trying to do here? Right? Like what are we optimizing for? Right? Are we just like trying to take the jobs of all the writers? Right? Because like so far, right, like that's really what these LLM models are really good at, right? They're really good writers.
But also,
Really good.
presumably, you're not just looking to stand on a soapbox via your app and rant to people about what they should be doing. And you posted on LinkedIn, I think only yesterday or the day before. What would everyone else like for me to feature on my podcast? Like, what are the things that people are thinking about right now? And presumably,
Yeah.
the platform is designed not only to be a kind of one-way street of information and coaching, but an opportunity for people to feedback and feel safe to sort of, share and to what's the word, democratize and
Yeah.
make more inclusive the work environment so everyone feels they have a voice.
Yeah. And I think the balance around those things is really, really important.
Coughing again. Oh, I like your nail varnish. For anyone who is not watching this on YouTube and is listening on the podcast, Josh has got multicolored nail varnish, which is very
Yeah.
fetching.
And
Love it.
yeah,
Is
it
that your
needs to
daughter?
be
Is that something
redone.
your daughters did?
Yeah, my daughters and my partner, we all kind of get into this together. So my partner and I, we always have matching, whenever we can,
I love
matching
it.
nails, and yeah, and the girls love it too for sure. Um, yeah, I think the balance between these things, Francis, is just hugely important. Um, and the balance, what I'm talking about there is the balance between kind of taking someone through a learning journey that isn't a like a deep dive into an LMS that I have that has no bottom, right? Like, right. So sometimes I think about these learning management systems as, right, like there's so much content in these things that there's just no bottom. Like it's an infinite scroll of content. And I actually don't think that's very helpful for most people who are working. We don't have time for that nonsense. I need to know, like, what is my focus for today? Just tell me tell me what I should practice today. But then to your point, making sure that people have a way to kind of feed back into the system and communicate with each other about how they're interacting with that content. And so that's the other thing Lovework does provide, is it's a way for the team to interact with each other and support each other and encourage each other to keep going and to reflect on, hey, yeah, this is the practice we're doing this week. How's this going for you? Um, so it becomes, less about that, this kind of what I think is really difficult journey of trying to figure out what the heck I should focus on. Like I have enough of those decisions to make. Don't make me make another one in terms of my kind of learning and development. I just think that's a complex like web of confusion. So instead of that, we say, hey, yeah, focus on this week. But then you get lots of permission and space to interact with that. And because I think that's what's most important is how are you doing with that? Or like
Mm.
just doing that practice, like trying to integrate a new mental model, trying to integrate a new behavior that's small and important. Those things are hard enough. So just like focus on the doing, and support and help each other to do it more.
So for any of our listeners today, if there are, I've got a question for you about how much size of an organization affects how effective this work is. Because I have in my mind, when I did my positioning for this business, that I would rather not work with organizations over 100 people, because
Mm.
having been in the corporate world and sort of around it for 20 years, I just cannot be bothered anymore with the right hand not talking to the left. I just can't deal with it. And it's just not where I want to be right now. And I want to make change so that I die feeling like I've had some sort of effect on the universe. And so part of my positioning was, I'm not going to work with too big an organization anymore. And I want to help the, small to medium sized organizations punch with and above the big boys and girls, as I say, because I'm also on a bit of a left-leaning mission to diversify the economy. You've obviously worked with a lot of organizations, and your app serves a wide range, I can imagine. What's your sort of, what's the perfect scenario? What's the kind of perfect storm that you've seen this work be effective in, basically?
Yeah. Yeah, there's obviously this work is needed at all levels, of all sizes, of all companies, all organizations, right? Everyone deserves to work in an environment that energizes them. So that's point one. I think point two is, I think what's really missing are, and this is why we build Love Work, is that this kind of work is actually very difficult to do at scale, right? So the opportunity that we see really being neglected is kind of in the middle of these really big organizations. So let's say 5 to 10,000 people or larger. What happens, and maybe this is some of what you were speaking to, or an output of what you were speaking to. A lot of these folks in the middle of these organizations get pretty neglected when it comes to things like learning and development. A lot of dollars around personal development get spent on executives, right? They get the coaching, they get the retreats, um, and that only goes, quote, down into the organization so far because it's too expensive. So this is a money problem by and large. We can't afford coaches and consultants and facilitators to take everybody on a leadership retreat in Napa, California. We just can't do it. It's not possible. And so what happens is, at the middle of these organizations, they get squeezed. Right? So these middle managers. So this is kind of the way I'm answering your question, right? This is a perfect scenario for something like Love Work, is these middle managers who lead departments, lead divisions. They don't get a ton of leadership development support. They might just get they might get a subscription to LinkedIn Learning. And that's more their internal LMS. Um, but they don't really they don't get deep leadership development. They don't really know how to lead a hybrid team, right? They got thrown into this a couple of years ago. Nobody kind of knows what the hell is happening with hybrids still, right? It's very confusing. It's very difficult. Um, So Love Work is really designed to kind of meet those people in the middle of these big companies and say, hey, here's something that can support you. Like, if you just run this experiment, if you run this program, on your hardware,
Mm-hmm.
um, you'll find that it'll help you build a more cohesive, performance-based, kind of integrated, inclusive team culture. And you don't have to do a lot of hunting and pecking and finding of like all of the different things you need. You just do these things, and it'll reduce your burnout. It'll increase your psychological safety, right? All the stuff that we know
Yeah.
that teams need, that leaders need. So that's really what we're trying to do, is get something into the middle of these companies where these poor folks who are leading these teams are getting squeezed, and not enough support.
You're also making me think, because I don't know how much about this you're aware, but I also run a community called Better, Bolder, Braver, which is a community of coaches, and we help people helpers, as I like to call them, to talk with better clarity and
Mm.
confidence and joy about what they're trying to do in the world by doing coaching. And half of them are executive coaches, um, and so are working in the workplace. And as you say, it's a money problem. And as far as I understand from what you're talking about, this is a fantastic tool for those organizations that are not that have the middle management issue that you speak of, but also are just sort of not able from a budgetary point of view to kind of invest in this
Yeah.
as much as the big boys are. And so this is a really nice sort of step into the world of coaching, into the world of development for employees if you've never gone there before. So if you're an organization who simply has never embraced coaching, doesn't really know much about it, is problem unaware, is how we might describe it in the Better World Rover community, then love work is a kind of easy, low-hanging fruit way of sort of testing the water, isn't it? With the view that if somebody really embraces it and gets really into it, and it's obviously very, very useful, then yes, perhaps more one-to-one coaching
Mm-hmm.
might be a bit more appropriate in a particular scenario, which I know you offer actually, right? So how does that work?
Yeah, we've got a whole kind of community of coaches in our world, in our tribe. And so, yeah, I think these things are very complementary, right? So it's very much, um, how do you create an experience that works for your organization, right? They're all a little bit, everybody's a little bit different. And, but I think what Love Work does remarkably well is give people a place to start, right? We wanted to create a bridge that made a lot of kind of the best in class kind of like leadership concepts
Mhm.
accessible to everybody,
Yeah.
and to not make people have to go and get buried into, you know, all the videos online or in YouTube, or like to try to figure this out on your own, to
Mm-hmm.
have to read all of the best selling you know, books on leadership, right? You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make all that stuff accessible. So yeah, I think you're right. Like this is a great place to start. And then yeah, you can absolutely bolster it with, you know, coaching for the managers, or, you know, more leadership kind of support, or all that stuff, right? So it's, yeah, hopefully what Love Work is it's an assistant
Mm.
to the coaches of the world to make their work more scalable and accessible.
I've got an idea. I'm interested in your thoughts. So one of my bits of the puzzle, once I've gone into an organization and I've done some work with them about what their story is, and I should mention also that having been in the world of toxic marketing bullshit, well, I
Mm,
wouldn't say that I've been in that world, but I've been swimming through the thick mud that is that world for 20
mhm,
years. Um, One of the things that's pissed me off more than anything is this kind of excitement about storytelling, but very much from the viewpoint of a kind of shiny, marketing centric storytelling. And what I'm trying to do is bring storytelling across the whole company, and as the daughter of a psychotherapist, to give space for the shadow side of stories, so to give people the opportunity to talk about some of the darker parts of their story as an organization,
mm,
and to find a space for those darker parts to exist.
mm,
And I'm trying to get customers involved as well, and that speaks from the cold light of day to returning business, customer retention, and obviously saving money therefore on marketing by having to, not having to find new customers all the time. And I'm interested in your thoughts on whether or not something like Love Work could be rolled out and could include customers as much as it does employees, and if that's something that you've considered from a kind of a UX point of view.
mm. Yeah. So we had some conversations like this early on with some clients actually, where they were delivering to customer, right? They were service consultants, so they were trying to bring their service into their customers. And very early on, it was kind of recognized to say, wow, it'd be great if our customers kind of, if we could add value to our customers' lives with this too, because they're also an organization and they would also like to be more energized by their work, and they'd also, right, they'd also like to have maybe kind of like a love work culture. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, part of the vision for this. And I
Mm-hmm.
think as love work grows, it's still kind of nascent in the market space. Um, but yeah, I would love to see. I'm excited to see kind of
Mm.
how some of our customers uh, want to use this to build closer relationships with their customers.
Yeah,
Is
and
that kind of what you were
I get
thinking, or am I
excited.
totally
Well, yeah,
missing the
so
mark?
I this book is about people who work. Song of Significance is about people who work for you. But I also love another book, which I'm going to hold up for you. And I'm not sure if you'll have had the chance to read this or even if you've heard of it. It's by a brilliant guy called John Alexander, and it's called Citizens.
Mm,
Um, he's a he's a UK author, and he is very big on the idea of uh, empowering the individual to take responsibility in the world. And you know, there's another bit of my work which is about community engagement, and I come from, my background is in corporate responsibility, and I've sat on the board of charities and worked for fundraising consultancies as well, and in government. So I'm very keen that the private sector works alongside in this country. It's, you know, sort of not for profits, social enterprises and community projects, and it's weaving customers into that experience as well, and making everybody aware that
mm,
they are a very, very meaningful part of this purposeful business's story.
yeah.
And you know, if it doesn't survive as a vineyard in Kent, then here's all the people that are going to get affected by its falling. And if we only have the
Yeah.
Amazons and sort of huge
Yeah.
multinationals and not the local businesses, albeit, you know, they're not small, but, you know, they're just not
Mm,
global entities, then here's all the people that are going to get affected and all the projects and all the customers. And
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a broad based kind of stakeholder question that I hear you asking, right? It's like who are who are our stakeholders? And I do think this is a big part of the journey in the next decade as well, is to really take a harder look at, yeah, who are all the players here, right? What are all the parts? Because we've been really neglecting a lot of the parts, and emphasizing certain parts of the system to the neglect and, I think, deficit of other parts of the system. And that's systemically unsustainable. We cannot do that in a system that will destroy a system. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stakeholder questions to be pondered in the next decade.
Mm-hmm. And who would you, just because I'm mindful of time, who would you like to see love the loving work, which sector? Or is there an individual, is there someone that you sort of
Mm.
fantasize about? Oh, I'd love for this to be part of your system.
Yeah, I think what we're really focused on now is supporting women leaders in these kind of large enterprise situations. So what we find is there's a lot of really fabulous uh, women um, leaders who end up in these kind of middle manager roles and are just vastly under resourced in terms of development and time and support. And those are the people we love. Excuse me. Those are the people we love to work with the most.
Excellent. So you might be working to get plugins for calendars that say I am menstruating and therefore it would be better if we don't have a meeting on Thursday. Is that going to be you guys?
You know what? I'm all for more transparency and like just safety, right? For people to be able to share. And I think this goes all the way like to even broader issues of psychological safety, of mental wellness and mental
Mhm.
health,
Well,
right? Because
my
it's
hot
like,
topic at the moment is perimenopause. So if you ever want to talk
mhm,
about how that feels,
yeah, yeah.
I'm your woman. So
Yeah, but I mean, but like, what a great example. I mean, we've got to be able to we bring these things with us, right? Whether we're talking about a menstrual cycle, whether we're talking about a mental health issue, or whether we're talking about a challenge I had with my kid and trying to get him, out the door in the morning. I think we bring these things with us to work. And if we can't talk about that,
mhm.
we are leaving part of ourselves behind, and we're distracting ourselves, right, from being able to like stay focused, when instead we could just share these things and say, hey, this is how I'm showing up. To like, a huge part of the love work experience is just teaching people that it is okay to just share how you're showing up.
I mean,
Like,
I
just
also find
notice
it
and
not
share.
only it would give permission to people to work in their authentic bodies, but also I find it a kind of comedic way of connecting with somebody incredibly fast. And also, I think men are crying literally out for us to normalize
Mm.
things like the second mountain and the kind of ways in which men undulate in and out of different hormonal
Mm.
moments in their life. And it, you know, so as
Mhm.
women, some of us feel it's our responsibility, some of our responsibility to help you guys to
Mm.
kind of talk a bit more about your own stuff. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I
I'm all
hope,
for it.
yeah, yeah. I hope we can take a lot of that responsibility ourselves and just like, wake the hell up and start being more open about these things.
It's
That's
not your
that's a
fault.
really important part.
It's not
Really
your
important
fault you
part.
were born with penises. And it's not people's fault if they've got money, and it's not their fault if they don't have money, and it's not their fault if they are educated or not educated. It's nobody's fault. This is not about a shit slinging situation. This is about like seeing people, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And making we have make creating both safe and brave spaces is my part, I would say. So not just safe, but also brave spaces where people can come in and speak the truth of what's happening. Uh,
mhm.
and
And also it's
and
an
have a
education
place
as
to do that.
well. It's an
Oh
educate.
yeah.
I think, you know, we are all in the business of sharing with each other. I mean, did I learn this morning from my gynecologist? Do you know that a hysterectomy is so called because of the word hysteria? And they have
I
not
did not
changed the
know this.
language. I know. I was like, she was
No
like,
way.
right? I
Oh
was like,
my
what?
God.
And she said, I feel responsible
What?
that we have not changed the language yet to change. Like, why don't they call it, you know, whatever the medical term for the removal of a womb is? It's still got hysteria in the name. Bonkers.
That, I don't know why I never thought about the etymology of that.
Me
That's
neither. Me neither.
terrible. Oh
Right. And
my
it's
God.
just a really good example of how we accept shit without asking. And it's just got
Wow.
this kind of toxic underlying inference. So, like I say, it's an
Yeah.
education for us all. And it's
Yeah.
fun and it's exciting that we might be able to move things forward. And I think we are looking at your nails. I think we are being able to move things forward. So,
I hope
um,
so.
it's lovely to have you on, Josh. Thanks so much for being here. And it's a privilege to speak to somebody on the other side of the pond. And I don't think this will be the last that we speak to each other. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
hope not.
I can see the future of our friendship blossoming. So,
I'd
yeah,
I'd
thanks
like that
everyone for
very much.
listening.
Yeah.
And if you want to find Josh, in case you're not watching this on YouTube, you can go to LinkedIn where you'll find him as Josh Allen. Then you've got I think is that the warmly.ai/Josh Allen. Is that the cup of tea buying thing? I don't know. What is that? Never heard of it.
I think that's just kind of the name tag there.
Oh, right.
But you can find me pretty much everywhere on social at Josh Allen. It's JOSHALLAN. If you want to find me online, you can find me pretty much anywhere with that.
And if you're really keen, you can see that he's kindly put his physical location being Denver. So if you'd really like to go and meet Josh, you just need to go to Denver. But we need to
Yeah.
caveat that with please be respectful and mindful of your carbon footprint and don't fly to Denver to see Josh. If there's any other way that you might be able to connect with him, I think he'd probably appreciate that from a kind of childcare point of view anyway. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Soon would be great.
it seems lovely. Um, okay, thanks, Josh. And thanks everyone for listening. Take it easy.